Welcome to Nightfall Narrative, where we delve into the powerful stories that define our lives. What you're about to hear is a deeply personal account of letting go and finding yourself. The phone call that finally broke me wasn't a screaming match. It was quiet, way too calm. It was my mother's birthday, and I'd called, like I always did, bracing myself for the usual show. The martyred sighs, the passive-aggressive comments dressed up as concern, the way history was always subtly rewritten to make me the villain in a story I didn't know I was starring in. But this time, it was a single sentence she said, so casually, after I told her I couldn't make it to the last-minute dinner she'd planned. She said, "Well, I guess some of us just don't value family. It's a shame. Your grandmother would be so disappointed." My grandmother had been gone for 5 years. She was my safe person, the one who saw *me. And in that moment, using her memory as a weapon, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered. The years of walking on eggshells, of making myself smaller to fit their story, of taking the blame for things I never did, it all just collapsed. I hung up, I blocked her number. Then my dad's, then my brother's. I didn't send a big, dramatic text. I didn't write a long, angry letter. I just vanished. I decided to stop answering the calls, to stop showing up, and to brace myself for the tidal wave of guilt and drama I was sure would follow. But what actually happened in the silence that came next was something I never could have predicted. It completely changed my life, my health, and my whole understanding of what it means to be alive. And that's what I want to talk about with you today. Before the silence, my life had this constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. It was the background music to everything. I'd wake up and my first thought was a defense strategy. Did I miss a call? Is someone mad at me? What fire do I have to put out today? My family ran on a system of unwritten, one-sided rules where my job was clear. I was the fixer, the emotional sponge, the peacemaker in a war I never started. A toxic family dynamic isn't always about shouting or obvious abuse. Sometimes it's way more sneaky. For me, it was a slow poison of subtle manipulation, constant criticism disguised as jokes, and a total disregard for my boundaries. It's what experts call emotional invalidation, where your feelings are constantly dismissed or told they're wrong. If I were proud of something, the response would be, "That's nice, but have you thought about?" The goalposts were always moving, so I was always coming up short. If I was hurt by something they said, I was just too sensitive or can't take a joke. When this happens for years, it grinds down your self-worth so slowly you don't even see it happening. You just start to believe it. You start to think maybe you are too sensitive. You are ungrateful. You are the problem. Holidays were the absolute worst. They were these big, theatrical productions of a happy family, and I always felt like I had the wrong script. I'd spend weeks leading up to a holiday in a state of high alert, doing mental gymnastics to plan every conversation, predict every emotional landmine, and try to be the perfect, cheerful daughter they seemed to want. I'd sit at the dinner table, smiling, while my brother made a joke about my career that was just a poorly hidden insult, and my dad would laugh, and my mother would watch me, waiting to see if I'd break character. If I defended myself, I was causing a scene. If I stayed quiet, I'd stew in this silent rage that would eat me up for days. Either way, I lost. This constant tension had real physical consequences. I had chronic insomnia. I'd lie awake for hours, replaying conversations, analyzing tones, trying to figure out what I could have done differently. I had migraines and constant stomach problems. My doctor just told me it was stress, but how do you explain that the source of your stress is supposed to be your source of safety? This isn't just in your head. Chronic exposure to these dynamics can lead to severe anxiety, depression, and a ton of physical health issues. I was living proof. I remember this one time, about a year before I cut contact. I got a small promotion at work. It wasn't a huge deal, but I was proud of it. I'd worked my butt off. I called my mom to share the news, my voice buzzing with excitement. There was this pause, and then she said, "Oh, that's good. Does that mean you'll finally be able to afford a better car? Your father and I worry about you driving that old thing." And just like that, all the air went out of me. It wasn't a celebration, it was a critique. My win was immediately twisted into proof of a past failure. This is classic toxic behavior, the inability to just be happy for you. Their world is so focused on their own drama that your happiness is either irrelevant or, worse, a threat. I was living in a constant state of reaction. My life wasn't mine. It was just a series of responses to their moods, their demands, their emergencies. I didn't have hobbies, I had obligations. I didn't have peace, I had temporary ceasefires. I had no idea who I was outside of the role they'd given me, and I was exhausted, just bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. I knew something had to change, but the idea of cutting them off felt so taboo, so profoundly wrong, that I couldn't even let myself think about it. We're all taught that family is everything. But what do you do when that everything is actively destroying you? The decision to finally go no contact wasn't a big explosion. It was the result of 1,000 tiny cuts. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts to my soul. That last phone call on my mom's birthday was just the one that was finally deep enough to make me realize I was bleeding out. For years, I had tried to fix things. I read all the books on setting boundaries. I listened to the podcasts. I tried using the scripts the experts give you. I'd say things like, "It hurts my feelings when you joke about my job, so please stop," or "I can't come over on such short notice. I need you to respect that I have my own schedule." Trying to set boundaries is the right first step. But in a truly toxic system, boundaries aren't seen as a healthy request for respect. They're seen as a declaration of war. Every boundary I tried to set was met with one of three things: pure aggression, manipulative guilt-tripping, or they'd just flat out ignore me. If I said, "Please don't comment on my weight," my dad would get mad and accuse me of being ungrateful for his concern. If I told my mom I couldn't lend her money again, she'd launch into a sob story about how she sacrificed everything for me and what a terrible mother she must have been to raise such a selfish child. But mostly, they'd just pretend I never said anything at all. They'd agree not to do something and then do it a week later. This is gaslighting, and it's designed to make you question your own reality. I was stuck in a spin cycle of dysfunction. I'd try to make space for myself, they'd bulldoze it, I'd get hurt, and then I'd be made to feel guilty for getting hurt. Psychologists call this a toxic cycle, and it's a loop that never ends because the goal isn't to solve the problem. The goal is to keep the power exactly where it is. And I think it's important to be clear about what toxic really means. It's not about the occasional argument that all families have. A toxic relationship is one where the bad consistently outweighs the good, consistently. It's where you feel drained, devalued, and anxious way more often than you feel loved and supported. It's a persistent pattern of harm. For so long, I thought it was my job to fix it. I thought if I could just be a better daughter, a more patient sister, if I just explained myself better, then they would finally get it. Then they would change. This is such a common fantasy for people like us. We think our love can magically fix people who have zero interest in changing. We spend all our time grieving the family we wish we had, instead of accepting the one we actually have. The turning point for me was accepting that I could not change them. My attempts at boundaries didn't fail because I was bad at them. They failed because they were never going to respect me as a separate person. The decision to cut contact wasn't an impulse. It was the absolute last resort, after every other option was burned through. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about saving myself. It was a radical act of self-preservation. The fear in that moment was huge. It felt like I was stepping off a cliff. My whole identity was wrapped up in being their daughter and their sister. Who was I without them? The guilt felt like a physical weight on my chest. Society tells you that cutting off family is the ultimate betrayal. But underneath all that fear and guilt, there was this tiny, flickering flame of something else. Hope. The hope that maybe I wouldn't fall, but I'd fly. The hope that silence could actually feel like peace. The hope that my life could finally be my own. So, with a shaking hand, I blocked their numbers. I blocked their social media. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew with a certainty deep in my bones that it couldn't be worse than what I was leaving behind. The problem wasn't me. It was the dynamic, and the only way out was to take myself out of the equation. Those first few weeks of silence were bizarre. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would launch into my throat, my body flooding with adrenaline, expecting an attack. But the attack never came. Not directly, anyway. The silence itself was a new kind of noise, a deafening emptiness where all the chaos used to be. The first phase after going no contact is this weird mix of relief and intense anxiety. On one hand, I woke up without that knot of dread in my stomach for the first time in years. It was like a high-pitched ringing in my ears had finally stopped. The quiet was amazing, but also totally disorienting. The struggle wasn't over, though. It just changed shape. When toxic people can't control you directly, they try to control what other people think about you. First came the flying monkeys, a term for the people a toxic person recruits to do their dirty work. My aunt called, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Your mother is just worried sick," she said. "She has no idea what she did wrong. Can't you just call her? This is tearing the family apart." This is a classic guilt trip. It frames my self-preservation as an attack. It makes me the bad guy and them the confused victims. For a second, I almost broke. The shame was overwhelming. Was I destroying the family? I had to remind myself, my voice shaking as I told her, "I'm not discussing this with you. This is between them." I had to learn to set boundaries all over again. Then came the social media smear campaign. A vague, passive-aggressive post from my mom about ungrateful children and how family is forever. Friends and relatives who had no idea what was going on would like it, and every notification felt like a small, public humiliation. You have to be ready for this. People will take sides, often without ever hearing your half of the story. The hardest part, though, was the battle inside my own head. The grief was a physical ache. It's a weird kind of grief, because you're not just mourning the people. You're mourning the dream of the family you never had and now officially never will. My first Christmas without them, I was surrounded by friends, but I felt this deep, profound loneliness. I was mourning the fantasy Christmas you see in movies, the one I'd always hoped we could be. And the guilt, it was a constant companion, a voice in my head that sounded a lot like my mother's. "You're a terrible daughter." What if something happens to them and you're not there? This is the result of years of conditioning. I had to actively fight that voice every day. A trick I learned was to ask, what would I tell my best friend if she were in my shoes? I would tell her she was brave as hell for protecting herself. I would never call her selfish. Learning to give myself that same compassion was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I doubted my decision constantly in those early days. Was I overreacting? Was it really that bad? Your mind has a funny way of romanticizing even the most painful past. I'd remember one rare good moment, a shared laugh, and my resolve would start to crack. So I made a reality checklist. I wrote down in detail the cruel words, the manipulation, the times my boundaries were stomped all over. When the guilt started creeping in, I'd read the list. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about holding onto reality. It was a reminder that my decision was based on a long, consistent pattern, not a single bad day. This phase isn't about finding instant happiness. It's about survival. It's about weathering the storm of pressure from the outside and the war on the inside. It's about holding that boundary when it feels impossible and letting yourself feel all the messy, complicated emotions, the relief, the guilt, the grief, the anger, without letting them drag you back into the fire. I had braced myself for drama, for angry voicemails and surprise visits. And while there were bits of that, the most profound thing that happened in the months that followed was quiet. The phone stayed silent. The manipulative texts stopped. And in that quiet, something I never, ever expected started to happen. My own life started to show up. The first change was physical. About 2 months in, I realized I had slept through the night for a whole week straight. As someone who'd battled insomnia for a decade, this was a flat-out miracle. The chronic tension in my shoulders started to melt away. The stomach aches that had been my constant companions just stopped. It turns out my body had been stuck in fight-or-flight mode for years. Removing the main stressor let my nervous system finally calm down. My body was healing now that it wasn't at war. Then came the real turning point, the mental and emotional shift. Without having to manage my family's feelings 24/7, all this mental energy was suddenly freed up. It was like I'd been running dozens of useless apps in the background of my brain for my entire life, and I finally got to close them all. Suddenly, the system had room to breathe. I started hearing my own thoughts. For the first time, I could hear my inner voice without it being drowned out by my mother's criticism or my father's dismissal. I started asking myself simple questions. What do I want to do this weekend? What do I actually feel like eating? For so long, my choices were based on what would cause the least amount of drama. Now I was a blank slate. I was getting to know myself. This process of becoming your own person, psychologists call it individuation, is often stunted in toxic families. The space from no contact is what lets you finally finish growing up. I found out I actually love hiking, something I was always told was boring. I discovered I was passionate about pottery, which I never would have tried before because I would have been terrified of being bad at it and getting criticized. I was rediscovering parts of myself I hadn't seen since I was a little kid. My other relationships started to transform too. Because I wasn't living in a world of manipulation anymore, I became more open and trusting with my friends. I had more energy for them. I could listen to their problems without my fixer-in-chief habit kicking in. I was finally learning what healthy, reciprocal relationships felt like, where support goes both ways. I started building what people call a chosen family, a network of people who actually showed up for me. One of the most unexpected perks was a huge surge in my self-confidence. Every single day I held that boundary of no contact was a promise I kept to myself. I was teaching myself, through my actions, that I was worth protecting, that my peace mattered. This self-trust started spilling into every other part of my life. I got more assertive at work. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do without feeling like I owed anyone a 5-page explanation. I stopped being a people pleaser because the main people I had been trying to please were gone. This wasn't a straight line to happiness. There were still days filled with sadness and waves of guilt. But the difference was that now, those feelings weren't a sign that I'd done something wrong. I realized they were just echoes of the old programming. The sadness wasn't me missing the abuse. It was my inner child grieving the love she always deserved but never got. The unexpected unfolding was this. By removing them, I found *me*. I thought ignoring them would create a void, an emptiness. But it wasn't empty. It was an opening. It was clearing a space that had been so cluttered with their noise that I had no room to grow. And in that new, quiet, sacred space, I finally started to. This is the kind of turning point we love to explore here on Nightfall Narrative, where the struggle gives way to strength. If these stories resonate with you, make sure you're subscribed so you can join us for every new narrative. Years have passed since that last phone call. The quiet that was once so loud has softened into a gentle, steady peace. It's not an absence of noise anymore, but the presence of serenity. This is my new reality, and it's better than anything I could have dreamed up on the other side of all that fear. My life today is built on purpose, not on reaction. I wake up, and my first thought is about my day, the project I'm excited about, the friend I'm getting coffee with. My nervous system isn't on high alert anymore. That hum of anxiety is gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that I can handle my life because my energy isn't being drained by someone else's drama. The biggest change is my definition of family. For so long, I thought family was an obligation, a bond of blood you had to honor no matter what it cost you. I've learned that's a dangerous myth. Real family isn't about blood, it's about behavior. It's about who shows up for you with respect and empathy. My chosen family is made up of deep friendships built on mutual trust. These are the people I call with good news because I know they'll cheer for me without any strings attached. They're the people I lean on when things are tough because I know they'll offer support without judgment. With them, home isn't a place you brace for, it's a feeling of safety. My mental health has stabilized in ways I truly thought were impossible. I know who I am, separate from the roles I was forced to play. I know my own worth, and I don't look for it in other people's approval anymore because I've learned how to give it to myself. I've learned to be kind to myself, to forgive myself, and to treat myself with the kindness I was always searching for. This doesn't mean I'm emotionless. In fact, it's the opposite. I have a greater capacity for all my emotions now. Joy feels deeper because it isn't tinged with the fear of it being snatched away. I can sit with sadness, my own or a friend's, without it completely taking me over. My emotional world is no longer a minefield. It's a garden I've learned how to tend. Even my career has flourished. With my confidence up and my mind clear, I started taking risks I never would have dared to before. I pitched ambitious ideas, negotiated for raises, and spoke up in meetings. I wasn't so afraid of failure anymore because my self-worth wasn't tied to what other people thought. Holidays are now genuinely joyful. I spend them with my chosen. Family, creating our own traditions that are free from obligation and emotional landmines. There's no performance, no walking on eggshells. Just laughter, good food, and the warmth of being with people who see and value the real me. Do I still think about them? Yeah, sometimes, but it's different now. It's not charged with pain or anger. It's more like a distant memory of a different life. I see them now, not as monsters, but as deeply wounded people who couldn't give the love I needed, probably because they never got it themselves. That doesn't excuse the harm they caused, but it does bring a sense of peace. I can love them from a great distance, forgive them for what they couldn't be, and still hold the boundary that keeps me safe. It was never about them changing. It was about me accepting they wouldn't and building a beautiful life for myself anyway. The resolution here isn't a fairy tale ending where we have a tearful reunion. The resolution is quieter and much more profound. The resolution is *me*, healthy, peaceful, and whole. The resolution is the life I built from the ashes of the one they almost burned to the ground. And it is more than enough. It is everything. If my journey has taught me one thing, it's this: choosing to protect your mental health is not selfish. It is the most fundamental act of self-love. For years, I was terrified of being called selfish. It was the weapon my family used to keep me in line. But I've learned there's a huge difference between being selfish and practicing self-preservation. Selfishness is taking from others with no regard for them. Self-preservation is refusing to let others take from you until you're destroyed. The most important lesson is that you cannot change other people. You can't love them hard enough or be patient enough to make them treat you with respect if they aren't willing to. The only person you have control over is you. And sometimes, the most powerful and loving thing you can do is to remove yourself from harm's way. Going no contact isn't an act of hate. It's a profound act of self-respect. It's you saying, I will no longer participate in a dynamic that hurts me. I also learned that boundaries aren't about controlling other people, they're about protecting yourself. A boundary isn't, you have to change. A boundary is, if you continue this behavior, here is what I will do to keep myself safe. For me, that boundary became no contact. For you, it might be something different. The point is, you get to decide what you will and will not tolerate in your life. And you have to let yourself grieve. You have to mourn the family you deserved but didn't get. Acknowledging that pain is a critical step to healing. It's okay to be sad and angry. It's okay to feel relief and guilt at the same time. Be gentle with yourself. Most importantly, you are not alone in this. When you're stuck in a toxic family, it feels like you're the only one in the world going through it. But you're not, far from it. Studies from researchers at universities like Cornell and Cambridge have found that as many as 1 in 4 adults in the US are estranged from a close family member. You're not just one in a million, you're one of millions. Finding a community, a support group, a great therapist, or even online forums can be a total lifeline. Hearing other stories makes you feel less like an outcast and more like a survivor. And the final, most empowering lesson is that your life is your own. You are not just a character in your parents' story. You are the author of your own. You get to decide what matters to you, what brings you joy, and who gets the privilege of being in your life. Breaking free isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning. It's taking the pen back into your own hand. You have a right to a life filled with peace, respect, and joy. You don't have to earn it, and you don't need anyone's permission to claim it. My life is 1,000 times better, not because my family changed, but because I did. I chose myself. And that has made all the difference. Deciding to go no contact with my toxic family was the hardest and best thing I have ever done. It wasn't a clean break, and the path to healing was definitely not a straight line. It was messy and painful. But the peace I have now is a peace I didn't even know was possible. It's the peace that comes from knowing my worth isn't up for debate. It's the peace of feeling safe in my own life. If you're listening to this and any part of my story hits home for you, please know this: your feelings are valid. That pain is real. You are not too sensitive or crazy for feeling hurt by genuinely hurtful things. Trust that feeling. If a relationship consistently leaves you feeling drained and devalued, you have every right to protect yourself. Healing is possible. Building a life filled with love and respect is possible, even if it looks different from the one you were told you should want. It takes courage and it takes time, but you are so worth it. You deserve to be the main character in your own life story. Thank you so much for listening. This topic is so often buried in shame and silence, and I really believe that sharing our stories is how we start to heal. Now, I'd love to hear from you. This is a safe space. If you feel comfortable, share one thing you've learned about self-preservation in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to feel a little less alone. And if this was helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to Nightfall Narrative. We're building a community here based on strength and support, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Thank you for being here. Be kind to yourself.